StudyIQ IAS. अब तैयारी हुई अफोर्डेबल.
Pakistan a failed state? Can it ever be a failed state?
It is about the fanatics getting hold of nuclear weapons. Sometimes I say that the Pakistan army is a fanatical organization anyways.
How much likely is it that one of the fanatic ulemas or mullahs are going to actually get hold of the nuclear weapon?
It's much more dangerous for these half-educated 10th pass, 12th pass generals in the Pakistan army. Most of them are utterly brainless. There is this old saying of King Farouk of Egypt, who said that if you look at the Pakistanis, you would imagine that Islam was revealed only in 1947.
Is raw there?
You know, the Pakistanis they are so dumb that it's some difficult to bloody even, talk to them rationally.
So the recent election, the military selected someone, but the selected person did not come to power. Lack of legitimacy, army in crisis, what is
No,
it
in
happening?
fact, the selected person came to power.
Sir, Nawaz Sharif was
No,
brought.
Nawaz Sharif was never... Nawaz Sharif was a compulsion.
Sir, he was brought back.
No.
Red carpet came and...
But under compulsion. You're very right. They don't know, are they Central Asian? Are they Arabs? Are they Persians? Are they Afghans? Or are they just normal Indians who've converted?
हेलो एंड नमस्ते, मेरा नाम है डॉक्टर दीपानिता और आपका स्वागत है जियोपॉलिटिकल डायलॉग्स बाय StudyIQ. आज हमारे साथ हैं सुशांत सरीन. First of all, sir, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
He is one of the best geopolitical experts on Pakistan and therefore on Afghanistan, Baluchistan and the whole drama. He is currently a senior fellow at the Observer Research Foundation and he's also associated with the Vivekanand International Foundation. But interesting बात पता है क्या है? He has qualified for UPSC and then later decided to leave it.
Yeah, at a time when nobody would.
Exactly, sir. And what made you take that decision?
It was very boring.
Aye. Okay.
Soul-destroying boring.
So,
sorry to spoil.
No, it's absolutely fine, sir. So today we are going to talk about Pakistan. And first question, sir. Is Pakistan a failed state? Can it ever be a failed state?
No, I think... it's kind of strange on how people will describe what a failed state is. But in terms of a state being able to manage its affairs, in terms of a state being able to correct revenues, one of the fundamental duties of any state is to be able to correct revenues. In terms of a state being able to take care of its citizens according to what it professes to be. By those standards, it's certainly a failed state. But it has that the framework of a state remains intact. The state institutions are tattered, they are dysfunctional, but there is that the edifice remains. But I think the ability of the state to manage its affairs is being pared down every single day. So in that sense, you can call it a failed state, you can call it a failing state, but it's definitely a state which is in very deep trouble.
But a nuclear state at the end of the day, would a nuclear state actually collapse? And I'm referring to an article that has been written by you.
Look, there is so far only one example of a nuclear state collapsing. That was the Soviet Union, right? And we don't have too many other examples of that happening. But even when the Soviet Union collapsed, there was some semblance of control which was finally, which was ensured even in the way it collapsed. In a sense, you can say it was a controlled collapse. It left a lot of instability in its wake. Look at the number of small and dirty wars that happened in the former Soviet republics. Between Russia and some of those republics, and as we speak, some of those wars are happening. Within those countries, civil wars, a lot of political unrest in many of these places. But even then, the fallout was limited. Now, in the case of Pakistan, again, you are faced with a spectre somewhat similar. That if this collapses, then what happens? The big problem in terms of Pakistan is that it is seen as an Islamic extremist, fundamentalist, fanatical state which has very close links with terror groups, which has been deeply involved in spreading global terrorism around the world. And a state like that, armed with nuclear weapons, if that goes under, then what happens? So I think one of the concerns is not so much about Pakistan per se. It is about the fanatics getting hold of nuclear weapons. Sometimes I say that the Pakistan army is a fanatical organization anyways, and it already possesses nuclear weapons, but there's still some degree of rationality in those guys. What happens if some really mad mullah gets hold of these nuclear weapons? Then how does that work? And starts using it as a currency of power for blackmail, something which the Pakistanis have been doing with us for donkey's years now, for at least 4 decades, since they became first covertly nuclear, then overtly nuclear. They have been using nuclear blackmail. But what happens if that becomes even more brazen? I think that is what the concern is. Then, of course, lose nukes. Since the Pakistanis are manufacturing tactical nuclear weapons, what happens if they start selling some of those weapon systems? What happens if they start farming out that technology, which they have done incidentally? That's a well-recorded fact that, there was a nuclear Walmart that was running about 2 decades back in Pakistan. And there are reasons to believe that even now, there will be many people in the Pakistani nuclear establishment who would be inclined to sharing either technology, know-how, what have you, with some of the other Islamic countries, many of which are not exactly, stalwart members of the international community. So there are those serious concerns. And then there are concerns about what happens when a country of 250 million people goes belly up. How do you control the fallout of that? And this is a country which is poor. This is a country which has extremism. This is a country which has huge fault lines within it. If this country folds up, goes belly up, who faces the fallout of that? The Europeans, for example, are terrified with the prospect that, so far there have been 1 million, maybe 2 million refugees who've gone from North Africa, from the Middle East, Syria and other war theaters into Europe and created havoc out there. What happens if another 2, 3, 4 million people, which is a fraction of Pakistan's population, start making a beeline for some of these countries?
Right.
What happens to them? So I think those are the real concerns now.
So how much likely is it that one of the fanatic ulemas or mullahs are going to actually get hold of the nuclear weapon?
Frankly, I'm not so worried about the mullah getting it. Because there is a certain amount of pragmatism that I've, in my interactions, again, I could be wrong on it, but even among the more fanatical characters, there is a certain amount of, they might look like dinosaurs, they might look like antediluvian characters, but in terms of their ability to understand the world, I think they are much better than some of the half-educated people in the Pakistan army. So I would be less concerned with, a mullah was to get hold of a nuclear weapon. He probably does not understand what exactly it's all about, but it doesn't take much for him to understand it. They will definitely use it as a currency of power. But for me, the biggest concern is when the uniformed guys in Pakistan army already have these weapons. And there are enough reasons to be concerned because, look, when a 3-star general, who was a former chief of general staff, which is essentially like the PS to PM is to a prime minister, he is like the PS to the Pakistan army chief. A man holding a very pivotal position. This is a man who's been a corps commander, he's been a CGS, you name it, he's handled those positions. And then he writes an article in a national newspaper in Pakistan, says that, we need to send a signal to India and the rest of the world. So we should fire a nuclear-tipped missile across the landmass of India into the Bay of Bengal as a kind of a sign to everybody to not mess with us.
That's
Okay,
dangerous.
the man has now disappeared. Apparently, it is believed that he went either joined the TTP or he, after retirement, much after retirement, either joined the TTP or the ISKP. It's not really known who. And he seems to have either died while fighting or disappeared. Uh, and nobody has heard of him ever since. I'm talking about a man by the name of Shahid Aziz.
Wow.
I can name a couple of other generals.
So this narrative is actually there.
Yeah. So that is what I'm saying. So it's much more dangerous for these half-educated 10th pass, 12th pass generals in the Pakistan army. Most of them are utterly brainless. Uh, so I think the possession of nuclear weapons in their hands should be of greater concern to people like us than maybe a Maulana Fazlur Rahman or one of these kind of characters getting hold of these weapons. You'll be surprised to know that there have been some Jamaat-e-Islami. Again, I hold no brief for the Jamaat-e-Islami or any of these fanatical organizations. In fact, Jamaat-e-Islami has been a mothership of terrorism in many ways, provided the ideological ballast for terrorism. But a former chief of the Jamaat-e-Islami, for example, said that we think nuclear weapons are un-Islamic, that using nuclear weapons against civilians is not something which is permitted. Again, it could be pure virtue signaling. But I'm saying that at least they said something like this. You will not hear these half-educated generals or the politicians who are their lackeys like Sheikh Rashid of the quarter-pound bomb, pow ke nuclear bomb, pow kilo ke nuclear bomb type characters. They are utterly brainless. So in that sense, I think we need to be careful when we speak about a mad mullah getting it. But that's the fear. See, that's the general fear, that's the general concern. What happens if these guys get it? And the concern really is of them using it as a currency of power, a currency for blackmail.
Sir, in that light, then why do you think that IMF keeps funding when the money is going to these terrorist camps? And it's a vicious cycle at the end of the day.
No, but look, again, the presumption is wrong. The IMF money is not necessarily going to terrorist camps.
Okay.
And most of these terrorist groups are now pretty much financially autonomous. I don't think they depend upon the Pakistan government for money.
So where does it come from?
The
sir?
money comes from other sources, charities, people's donations. They run some of their own operations, illegal, many of them, gun running, drug running, extortion networks, protection networks. Smuggling is a big business. So they collect money from many of those sources. And bank dacoities, for example, there was a time when there was a sudden spate of bank dacoities, and invariably they found that the TTP and some of these other groups were involved in some of these acts. So they manage their own sources of funding. They don't depend upon the Pakistani state. The Pakistani state really doesn't have money for it. What the Pakistani state does do is facilitate it. So in a sense, they'll turn a blind eye. If somebody gets caught, they'll release him. They will allow smuggling to happen. Now, I don't know if people have seen images of oil smuggling which happens along the borders with Iran. And there are estimates which run from anywhere between $1 to $2 to $3 billion worth of oil which is smuggled every year. And it's, that smuggling is not happening surreptitiously. It's happening in your face. There are hundreds of tankers and trucks going to the border, reaching the border, filling up with the oil and coming back in. You can't do this, like a normal gold smuggler, ke wo kuch pocket mein kahin pe joote mein dal dool ke, people are doing that kind of. This is not that. This is in your face smuggling, right? Now, this cannot happen unless the authorities are allowing it to happen, which means they're turning a blind eye and they're taking a cut out of it. Some of it personally. So a corps commander in Quetta, for example, ends up as one of the richest men in Pakistan. Some of the generals who are in Baluchistan, because they are part of the extortion, protection rackets, they're involved in the gold, oil, drug smuggling networks. They facilitate all of them. They're involved in the smuggling of cars from Europe and other places, stolen cars which are then smuggled across the borders into Pakistan. They're involved in all those nefarious activities, so they end up as very rich men. But some of the money also goes to some of these terror groups and others. So, it's a kind of a witch's brew between many of these groups. There are smugglers also, there are terrorists also, there are all kinds of people. So the way the state becomes involved is that it facilitates that, it turns a blind eye to that activity. But the IMF loan goes to Pakistan simply because Pakistan is a member of the IMF. And it is the job of the IMF that if a member state is in trouble, then the IMF does come for a rescue package. What the IMF, of course, does is that it looks at the economy, it looks at the economic structure, it looks at the financial structure, and then puts certain conditionalities which become progressively difficult as you keep going back to the IMF. And Pakistan has already been to the IMF 23 times. They're all set to go for a 24th time.
Correct, sir.
Now, 23 times or 24 times in the last 75 years means roughly about every 2 years, 3 years, you're going back to the IMF. Okay. And that means that by the time you come out of one program, you're going back into another. Assuming you finish the program, they've only finished one program till now. Normally, they would take a program, take 1 or 2 tranches, and then that was the end of it. Things would stabilize some. They would go back to their normal old ways of running the economy, which was basically running it into the ground. Now they've successfully done it. And they've reached a point where the IMF is imposing some really stiff conditions on them. Now, of course, there's a lot of cribbing in Pakistan that why is the IMF turning the screws on us? But the IMF says that, look, you have to make your ends meet, which means that you need to generate revenues. You can't expect the rest of the world to pay for your expenses, which is what has been happening so far. So I think that is where matters lie right now. But I think where the IMF funding is concerned, and that is a matter which the Americans have raised with some degree of seriousness, it is that over the last decade or so, the Pakistanis have gone very deep in the hawk to the Chinese. They owe a lot of money to the Chinese, and they have no way of paying it back. And the Americans have expressed the concern that if the IMF was to come and bail out the Pakistanis again, and it's not just the amount of money which the IMF gives them, the IMF gives money and then takes them under their umbrella. So that gives a lot of comfort to international financial markets. That gives a lot of comfort to multilateral financial institutions. So a lot of other funding is unlocked because you've gone to the IMF. Now, what the fear is that once this happens, the Pakistanis would take all that money and then start paying back the Chinese.
Okay, sir.
And they don't want that to happen. So the IMF has now been insisting on seeing what the Pakistanis actually owe to the Chinese. Many of the contracts which the Pakistanis signed with the Chinese on the China-Pakistan economic corridor, they were never transparent. They were never made public. But finally, the Pakistanis had to open it up for scrutiny to the IMF. So the IMF is certainly going to insist that, it cannot be that you take money from us and you are paying off the Chinese. That is where they've put the foot down. But on this whole terrorism thing, not so much.
So then, is there a sense that China is getting tired of Pakistan, or is it the vice versa? Because so much of investment or money has gone into it. CPEC is not yet kick-started. A lot of things are happening at the Pakistan, and because of the failure of the government and the militancy is rising up all everywhere. Do you think China is getting frustrated now? Especially Baluchistan area, sir.
Look, there are again concerns within China. I think the Chinese assessment that they will be able to give a kind of an economic underpinning to the larger strategic relationship, I think that has gone out of the window. That the Chinese probably have come to the conclusion that there is no political purchase in Pakistan. That all the money which they have sunk in Pakistan is sunk, basically. And in fact, even at the time when the CPEC projects were being unveiled, there were reports that some Chinese analysts had warned that China will end up losing almost 80% of the investments they are making in Pakistan. A lot of people scoffed at those reports, but clearly that seems to be coming true now. and what the Pakistanis owe to the Chinese in terms of even meeting the normal running costs, of those Chinese power plants, for example, that's been escalating. And I think by latest count, it's something between 1.5 to $2 billion is what
Wow.
they owe to these private companies. So I think that economic angle, the Chinese have realized that there's nothing much to be got out of this. Uh, but I think the Chinese will not forsake Pakistan insofar as the political and diplomatic and strategic side of the relationship is concerned. I think that remains fairly robust. We shouldn't fool ourselves that has changed. Um, and to maintain that relationship, the Chinese will keep stringing the Pakistanis along on the economic front. So, as of now, as far as I can remember, over the last 2 years or 3 years, I can't remember any new money having been given to Pakistan. But what has happened is that some of the old loans are constantly rolled over, sometimes at new rates, sometimes at old rates. It's basically that old moneylender thing, that as long as I keep getting my interest, the principal I can forget for some time. So I think that's the game the Chinese are playing right now. So no new money is really being sunk in. Yeah, every day you will hear of these very fabulous MOUs being signed.
Correct.
And if MOUs was to pull Pakistan out of trouble, Pakistan would have become Switzerland Square by now, right? They've signed so many MOUs with so many people that it would have become the most hip and happening place in the world. But those MOUs don't fructify because the underlying conditions don't change. So I don't think there was any real Chinese appetite to put in any more money in Pakistan on the economic side. But they will keep putting in money to maintain the strategic and the political side of the relationship. तो वो थोड़ा बहुत पैसा जाते रहेगा, but nothing more than that.
Right, sir. So, what about, because if you look at the media reports, constantly it says that Azadi ki goonj hai Pakistan mein, Baluchistan mein, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa mein. Is it really there, or is it just the media narrative?
Look, I think both these provinces are very restive. Baluchistan in particular, very, very restive. And there is a substantial body of opinion in Baluchistan, at least in the Baloch areas, who don't want any truck with the Pakistani state. They're completely alienated and disillusioned with the Pakistani state, and they would want out if they were given a chance. Some of them are fighting for it, others are just sullen, but the resentment against Pakistan is at a peak. So that is undeniable. In the Pashtun areas, both of Balochistan as well as the KP province, again, I think something has snapped. I wouldn't say that it is at least in these areas, I don't think it is a call for independence or separation as of now. But it is certainly a kind of alienation with the Pakistani establishment. And what we are seeing in some of these areas is something that has not been seen before, which is the amount of anger which is mounting against the Pakistan army, the Pakistani establishment as such, against Punjab, the number of voices that are being raised. I don't think I remember seeing them in at least the last quarter century. Maybe in the 60s, 70s, it was there. But now it's reached at a different level. Now, there are three sections of people who are completely alienated. One is, of course, the Islamist lot, the TTPs and that bunch. The second is the nationalist lot, which is now being represented in large measure by groups like the PTM, and one of its political affiliates, not really affiliate, that's the wrong word, but a similar organization which is called the National Democratic Movement, which is it has kind of sprung out of PTM itself. That's the second. These are nationalists, young, many of them middle class types, educated, very passionate, And they are really pissed off, if I can use that word, with the Pakistani state. That's the second. The third element is of uh, what you might call the Imran Khan cult. That has really turned off. They're very angry. And if you put all of these together, that's about 75-80% of the population in KP, in many of the Pashtun areas. So I think there you're seeing that phenomena. How that finally crystallizes is difficult to say right now, but you can be rest assured on the purblindness of the Pakistan army, of the generals from Punjab, who will leave no stone unturned to alienate these people further. So I think we can depend upon them for doing
To make it worse.
Yeah.
Okay, sir, but I'm going to come back to Baluchistan again. Mariam Baluch, is she going to be a major voice? She's already, but...
Maharang Baluch.
Maharang Baluch, sorry, sir. Do you think she's going to be...
No, I think she has proved to be a very intrepid lady. And look, in Baluchistan, we've seen a number of such women leaders emerge. There was one, Karima Baluch, who was killed in Canada, and the Justin Trudeau government covered it up. It was very clearly a targeted killing operation. They covered it up, called it a suicide. There have been other Baluch ladies who have been very, very strong about this. So I think Maharang Baluch is part of that continuum of these Baluch women who are coming out and leading from the front. Now, Baluchistan is a very secular society and yet a very conservative and orthodox society, right? It's secular in the sense that, they don't wear their religion on the shoulder, like most of the Punjabis do. The Punjabis are the most fake Islamists you can ever come across, but nevertheless, they wear that, they try and pretend that Prophet Muhammad only discovered them as the first Muslims. And in fact, there is this old saying of King Farooq of Egypt, who said that if you look at the Pakistanis, you would imagine that Islam was revealed only in 1947. So that is the Pakistani Punjabi, but the Baloch is that way, is very relaxed about his religion, his faith. He doesn't need to shove it in somebody else's face. But in that society, socially, they've been very conservative. Women would generally be at home. They were not treated like chattel, no, but they were generally at home. It was not that, it was not the done thing for women to be out on the streets and stuff like that. But that has changed. That has changed over the last 20-25 years with the kind of brutality with which the Pakistan army has repressed the political aspirations of the people in Baluchistan. So as a result, what has happened is that their fathers have been kidnapped, their brothers have been kidnapped, their husbands have been killed, their sons have been taken away from them. And so what do women do? They come out on the streets, they protest. And that's what they've started doing. So now they are suddenly at the forefront of political agitation. And Maharang Baluch, of course, turns out to be an extremely articulate woman. Hats off to her for and very, very politically savvy. They see, for example, just about 3 weeks back, there have been massive rainfall in Gwadar and some other areas of Baluchistan, and massive flooding has happened. The state, as usual, was slow to respond, even though they had two members of the military establishment. One was the caretaker Prime Minister, Anwarul Kakar, and the other was a man who was involved with death squads, involved with the most heinous crimes, who's now the Chief Minister of Baluchistan, Sarfaraz Bukti. He was then the Interior Minister. Actually, he was not the Interior Minister when the floods happened because he'd already put in his papers and he was fighting the election. But among the first responders were the Baloch nationalists who went out there, tried to organize aid, tried to organize relief and rescue. So, they're quick, they are marshalling support, they are winning over the people. People are identifying with them. When Maharang Baluch goes back after her agitation in Islamabad, the kind of crowds that came out to to meet her. I can't think of such big crowds anytime in Balochistan in the last couple of decades. So clearly they are finding a lot of traction. Question is, how do they manage to turn that traction into something much more potent? That will be the trick. And then turn it potent in a way that they can take on the ferocity and the brutality and the savagery that the Pakistan army is going to visit upon them. How do they manage to do that? And I think that is going to be the real challenge. And at a time when they get no support from anywhere in the world, all these human rights entrepreneurs, the Human Rights Watch, the Amnesty International, the Greta Thunbergs of the world, all these people, these perfumed people whose hearts bleed for human rights and other stuff, all those people, free Palestine posters and all of that. Not a word you will hear about the brutalities which are being visited upon the Baloch, at least almost for 75 years, but certainly over the last 25, when the fifth insurgency started. You don't hear anything. It's like everybody is gone deaf, dumb, silent. Human Rights Council of the United Nations, UNHRC, all those Jordanians and other jokers who come and pontificate about internet shutdown in Kashmir. Not a peep out of them on what's happening in Balochistan. You will not hear anything from the EU, which is the quickest when it comes to sermonizing, and their sanctimony is like next level. When it comes to Balochistan, not a word. Even we keep quiet.
We have been using the Baluch Card.
Yeah, but what? That hardly, that is just mentioning something. Just mention the word Balochistan. That's not good enough. If we actually feel very strongly about it, then we should be saying a lot more than what we have said so far. And I don't know why we are so mealy-mouthed about it, but
Sir,
I
it's
don't
raw
make
there.
Government of India policy.
Is raw there. Lot of reports keep coming in.
Look, if Raw is there, it's not going to tell me.
Right?
Okay, they are not going to be taking me into confidence, certainly not.
But a lot of reports keep coming, and even Pakistan keeps blaming us. That
Look, the point is they can keep I wish Raw was involved. I wish, and they were involved much more than if they are involved already than what they are. But, the fact that we don't even talk about it, we are not even ready to issue a statement of condemnation to, the kind of brutalities that are being done out there. We don't even talk about it. So what kind of people are we? So I don't think, I can understand that if there is some kind of liaison, right? That is the job of intelligence agencies. If some lines of communication are open, some contacts have been established, that I won't put past, happening. But beyond that, to say they are involved. I have not seen any evidence so far. Where is the evidence? Okay, for evidence, the Pakistani, but Kulbhushan Jadhav.
Yeah, exactly.
The Pakistanis, they are so dumb that it's some difficult to bloody even, talk to them rationally. And the problem is that in Kulbhushan Jadhav's case, the guy was living in this place, Zahedan, I think he was kidnapped from. Or was it in Chabhar? I'm even forgetting that. And he was kidnapped from there. Now, the simple fact of the matter is, and there is within the Pakistani media, there have been some insinuations that there have been these criminal gangs which are part and parcel of the Pakistani state. They work as auxiliaries of the Pakistani state. That includes people like a guy by the name of Uzair Baluch, who was heading one of the criminal mafias in Karachi and involved in the Karachi gang wars and stuff like that. There have been reports inside Pakistan that he and his men were involved, were at the forefront of this kidnapping operation, which was launched to get hold of Jadhav. This is in Pakistani media. I am not making it up. And then if you look at how the Uzair Baloch case has been handled, he was then finally arrested by the Pakistani authorities, and he had something like 150 cases against him of the most heinous crimes. He has gotten away scot-free in virtually all of them. How is that happening? So there are, like I said, that region is a witch's brew. कौन किसके साथ कहाँ पर कितना involved है, it's impossible to say. And certainly nobody is going to tell me. My sources of information are basically what is there in the public domain. So I don't have any other source of information.
Right, sir. So let's come to the KP area, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. Rise of TTP, is it because of what Pakistan did, first supporting the Taliban, making them the holy warriors, and then selling them to, giving information about them to the US?
I think the TTP phenomena goes much beyond that. What the Pakistanis have done and the double games they have played has only contributed to it. But this whole region goes up in flames way back in 1979-80. Actually, even before that, in the early 70s, when the Afghans start raising the specter of Pashtunistan. Bangladesh has already been made. Within Pakistan, Baluchistan is very restive, as is the then northwestern frontier province, where you have people like Wali Khan and others, and there is this movement for Pashtunistan or Pashtun rights or what have you, which raises the specter of another Bangladesh in the mind of the Punjabi rulers of Pakistan. Pakistan is basically Punjab-occupied Pakistan, right? So whatever the Punjabis, their fears are expressed. Now that is the setting in which the Afghan regime under Dawood, who has carried out a coup against the king, he's his brother-in-law, but he's carried out a coup. He's become the president, and he raises the specter of Pashtunistan. So to counter him, the Pakistanis start sponsoring people like Gulbuddin Hikmatyar and others, who are students in the university, but they are leaning towards Islam. That includes Ahmad Shah Massoud, that includes a whole lot of other guys. So the patronization of the Islamists in Pakistan starts from around 1973 or thereabouts. You come to 1979, or small things are happening, but you come to 1979 and the Soviets move in to Afghanistan, and then the first Afghan jihad starts, and the Pakistanis already have prepared this crop of people who they then say that we can use them, and then of course a whole lot of other people join. These were like the high culture Islamists, right? The educated, university going, but then there were a whole lot of others, that the lot from which the Mullah Umars and others came. There were a whole lot of other Islamists who also jump on the bandwagon. And that happens in 79-80. Now then this whole jihad factory starts, this whole jihad industry starts. They start importing these characters from around the world. When the Soviets withdraw and civil war breaks out, and that is when the first Taliban movement emerges. This is around 92, 93 or 94 really. Around 94, 92 tak, the Najib government has fallen. Burhanuddin Rabbani and Ahmad Shah Massoud have taken over Afghanistan. And by 94, and there are warlords all over the place. And by 94, the Taliban movement starts. By 96, they have captured Kabul. Now you have to understand, these guys are basically Pashtuns. They are what you might call, at some level, the low church. These are also people with links across the Durand line into Pakistan. And the day these people take over Kabul, from then on, you will see, if you look at the Pakistani media reports of those days, you will see that in some obscure part of the tribal areas in Pakistan, 4 or 5 young people would suddenly get up and proclaim, we are the local Taliban, right? They were inspired by the Taliban victories. They were inspired by what the Taliban stood for. They were basically from that same social background. They were from that same low church background, all of that, right? And some of them had the same madrasa connections, stuff like that. So that is where these local Taliban start emerging. Many of them keep crossing the border, fight on the side of the Taliban, come back, set up their own, little shops inside Pakistan. And this movement continues to expand inside Pakistan. And what happens is a lot of these guys also start working for the Taliban government. So they attach themselves to some Taliban leaders, koi kisi ka secretary hai, koi kisi ka driver hai, that kind of a thing. Then you have the Americans moving in post 9/11, and the Taliban government is devastated. Most of these guys run into Pakistan for refuge. And who are the people who give them the refuge? The very same local Taliban characters, or who have proclaimed themselves to be local Taliban. The names are very different, but they've said that we are Makami or local Taliban. So they start giving them refuge. They facilitate them, they accommodate them, all of that. And then the fighting starts inside Pakistan. Now, this goes on for a couple of years, and then the Lal Masjid operation happens, which is when all these small, disparate local Taliban groups combined together under the umbrella of the TTP, Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan. So that's the way this movement has evolved. As you go along, then the TTP becomes really strong, then it's defeated, it suffers major setbacks from around 2014 or thereabouts. They are pushed back into Afghanistan, and they also split. There are at least major splits within the TTP. Their top leadership is decapitated. And I think at that point of time, the Taliban also, because now there's an organic link which ties them together. But I think around 2017, 28, the Taliban also sense that the end game is coming. So they also asked the TTP to pipe down and focus more on Afghanistan at that point in time, which is why you'll suddenly see a massive drop in terror attacks. Part of it was the operations of the Pakistani forces, but part of it was also that their focus had turned into Afghanistan. But by around 2019, the old TTP leadership has been destroyed, and a new leader emerges in this guy Nur Wali Mahsood. And what Nur Wali Mahsood does is he re-establishes those old networks, he rebuilds the umbrella, brings in a whole lot of the factions back into the main thing, and starts expanding the footprint of TTP once again. But the expanding footprint actually becomes clear after the Taliban victory in Kabul. Because now that that flank has been secured, now you can reopen this flank.
Right.
And that is what has been happening now. And this movement is only gaining strength. It's not becoming weaker. And unlike the past, when the Afghan Republic, before the Taliban, before 2021, the Afghan Republic always clamped down on TTP activities to the extent that they could, because there were a lot of areas where they were simply not in control. But the areas where they were in control, they did clamp down on TTP activities, which is why you had 5,000 TTP people in Afghan jails, all of whom were released the day the Taliban took over. So suddenly the TTP is the most hip and happening group. But they've also developed a lot of savvy on how to carry out their attacks. So unlike the past, from around 2007 to about 2014, when they were attacking markets, they were attacking malls, they were attacking all kinds of civilian targets. Now they're very particular about the targets. So they're only attacking military installations, security forces, some government offices. Civilians are collateral damage now. They are not the main target. And that seems to have kind of made people somewhat ambivalent towards them. That okay, we don't like these Fauji's anyways. These guys are targeting the Fauji's. The Fauji's have been hand in glove with these fellows. Okay. इनकी आपस की लड़ाई है, why should we get into it? So I think that is what is happening now.
So the recent election,
Yeah.
the military selected someone, but the selected person did not come to power. Lack of legitimacy, army in crisis. What is
No,
it
in
happening?
fact, the selected person came to power.
Sir, Nawaz Sharif was
No.
brought.
Nawaz Sharif was never Nawaz Sharif was a compulsion.
So he was brought back.
No, no.
Red carpet came and...
But under compulsion. Under compulsion. He was never a favorite of the army. The person who has been a favorite of the army, who is the most obsequious character, is Shahbaz Sharif.
He's really not someone who can run the government.
He's nuts, of course.
Yes.
But that's not the point. Shahbaz Sharif had established a reputation for himself as a very good administrator, as the Chief Minister of Punjab. Now, good administrator in Pakistan means that, you issue orders like you are Muhammad bin Tughlaq, right? Or you sack people summarily, that kind of a thing. But nevertheless, he did have something to show for his tenures as Chief Minister in Punjab. But he was never a popular guy, and you need to take one look at him to understand why he'll never be popular. He'll wag his finger, he'll throw the mics all over the place, he'll make these exaggerated gestures, he'll pretend he's a revolutionary poet, and it all falls flat, right? He'll make the most grandiose statements, which he has no hope. For example, he said that I will sell all the clothes on my body if I cannot feed people. He has not sold off anything. So, he's that kind of a bit of a fraud. He's not a popular figure. He can't win a dog catcher's vote kind of a deal. But he's a good sidekick to his brother, who was actually the man with the vote bank. But the army never really liked Nawaz Sharif because he's always had a tiff with them. He wants to be his own boss. Shahbaz Sharif is very happy if he has a boss. Now, he has a boss in Asim Munir, so he's going to be happy for as long as it lasts. But he also has another boss who's the political boss in Nawaz Sharif. So he will now have to balance between those two bosses. But I think from the Pakistan Army's point of view, in a way, this result is not so bad. It's a terrible result, okay? It's a terrible because all the plans which they had made have fallen flat.
Exactly, yes, sir.
But they have managed to retrieve something out of this result. And what I mean by that is that once you've been dealt your hand, they've seen, okay, fine, these are really shit cards, but what's important is the fact that I might be able to play a winning hand even with this thing, which means that, okay, fine, the PTI would have won the election, it would have swept the election. I have ensured that they cannot form the government in the center. I have given them the province of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. So they are out there. They can't crib too much because they've got some share of the pie. Ideally, I would have wanted that in Punjab, instead of the PTI getting so many seats, this new party which I had created would have got the seats, the Istikam-e-Pakistan party, right? Jahangir Tareen and others. They've all lost. They got 2 seats, one of which was also through rigging. So instead of that, now you are forced to do a shotgun marriage between the Pakistan People's Party and the Muslim League. So you have this cohabitation between these two parties, which kind of works well for the Pakistan Army. You have a small smattering of other smaller parties, the MQM and others, whom you all clubbed together and brought into this coalition. So in terms of numbers, you have plus 200, which means a fairly comfortable majority, something which Imran Khan never had. So to that extent, things seem to have worked out for you. You've got a government, you've got a puppet prime minister, you've got a government which is, a coalition which you will only control, you will only manage. So in that sense, you manage to get what you want. But actually, if you look at the performance of the PTI, and again, I keep telling people that, look, it does not mean that you have to be in love with Imran Khan to see reality for what it is. And the reality is that Imran Khan has won this election hands down, right? And in fact, he's won this election with his legs tied and his hands tied behind his back. He could not even run in the race, and yet he's won the race. And anybody who tells you that, look, but the people who are not voting for Imran Khan have got 2/3 of the vote is utter nonsense. This was a stolen mandate by any and every stretch of imagination. And that is a matter of some concern because for the army, that means that all this propaganda campaigns that we've done, all this field setting that we had done, everything has gone to seed. Right? And that is a matter of some concern. They still think they can brazen it out. And maybe for some time they can, but frankly, this government does not have any degree of political legitimacy, and its popularity will become even more problematic when they start implementing some of the very difficult decisions that they'll have to take to try and rescue the economy, which I find very difficult.
So in all of this, where is Bilawal Bhutto? Or he's just like a dynastic prince who's kept aside?
No, he is a dynastic prince. He's not kept aside. He tried very hard to expand the Pakistan People's Party support base beyond Sindh. So yeah, I think you can give him some marks for effort. But you know what it is. Like, there are some kids who will put in very hard effort and still not be able to score.
Right.
So which is what has happened. Because if you look at the PPP, they won about 5 or 6, I don't have the exact number right now on my fingertips, but they won about 6-7 seats in Punjab. Most of them from South Punjab. And again, these are traditional seats that they would have probably won. Big landlords, big feudal lords, that kind of a thing. But if you look at, with all the effort which Bilawal Bhutto made to try and raise his voting percentage in Punjab, at the end of the day, the PPP still had the same number which they got in 2018, which is 6% of the vote in Punjab. So where does that leave him? They are non-existent in KP, right? They managed Baluchistan, but Baluchistan they managed by a sleight of hand, not because they are a popular party out there. So their only bastion is Sindh, and it remains Sindh, where again there has been a lot of rigging, a lot of arm twisting, a lot of vote robbing, all kinds of things which have happened. They would have won anyways, or at least they were best placed to win. But I think they've overplayed their hand and won much more than what they would have otherwise won. But that is where they're limited to. Of course, in the larger scheme of things, the fact that they managed to get about 50, 53, 54 odd seats, that is the directly elected ones, means that they become a very important player in the current setup. Right. Because without them, you cannot form a government in the center. So to that extent, yes, I think they've done well, but otherwise, nothing to show for it.
So the recent judgment on the Zulfikar Ali Bhutto?
Neither here nor it's virtue signaling of the worst kind. I don't think anybody in Pakistan ever took that judgment seriously. I think there was in any case, there was always a consensus that it was a judicial murder. So I don't know what, unless of course you wanted, that stamp, that final stamp of approval. Other than that, I don't see what purpose that whole judgment serves. And the way the entire case was also carried out, it first started, then everybody went to sleep on it for many, many months. And then suddenly, this new Chief Justice, after he got a lot of hollering on the issue of Imran Khan and his party symbol and all of that, I think he suddenly revived this Bhutto thing, held these 4 or 5 days. And in 4 or 5 days, you decided the whole case, which everybody knew that was a completely botched up, judicial system that kind of gave that verdict. So, but it doesn't really change anything. How does it change anything? It's not going to make PPP more popular in Punjab. That's not happening. I don't think the PMLN is going to end up being very popular in Punjab after what it's going to be doing over the next few months.
Right, sir. So last 2 questions. 1, POK. Is there any chance that can be resolved? Because there's so much of narrative on that, especially when the recent protests that happened.
No, I don't think it can be resolved. I don't see how POK... First, I think we need to be clear on what we mean by resolution. And I don't know what is there in this Indian mind that we're always trying to find resolutions to problems. Why? There are some problems which have no resolutions. So you learn to live with them and then you wait until a time presents itself, when a resolution presents itself, and then you grab it. So I don't know why we keep looking for resolutions. I find that a little strange. Secondly, I think to talk about a resolution of POK at this stage, yeah, if you're prone to dreaming and delusions, yeah, you can do it. But I don't think it's likely. Of course, look, what might happen 2 years, 5 years, 10 years from now is a different matter, right? So, for example, if the economic crisis in Pakistan deepens, then you can be faced with a situation where, and we've seen certain recent protests, especially in PO Pakistan occupied Ladakh region, Gilgit-Baltistan, where some of the old subsidies and other things that were being given to people were being withdrawn, and there were massive protests. Simply because people said, you can't do this to us. You have to give us political rights, you have to give us civic rights, all sorts of other things. And if the political situation and the economic situation deteriorates, then what happens? And I think that is where opportunities could present themselves. But to say koi resolution is going to come, I'm a little skeptical on that count.
Right, sir. So the last question, and going back to the first question, that is a failed state, wala. Does Pakistan have an identity crisis? It's not an Islamic country by the Islamic country's definition, nor is it has the Indian history part or the civilizational state, and there's a lack of legitimacy for the army, especially with this election.
No, I think they've always had a very confused sense of identity. There is a sense of a Pakistani identity, but there is no clear idea of what exactly that means. There's a very clear sense of an Indian identity, and we all know what an Indian means, right? So there is a very clear sense of a Pakistani identity, but I don't think anybody in Pakistan can really define what a Pakistani is. And I think one of the best definitions is that we are not Indians, which means that it comes out of negativity. These are the same people, whenever they go out somewhere, they're basically, unfortunately, lumped with us, or they lump themselves as South Asian, which riles Indians no end. We are not South Asian, we are Indians, you are South Asians. We don't give a damn about you, right? No Indian is a South Asian. Anybody else can be, is welcome to be a South Asian. And all these guys, they lump themselves with us. I don't know why. So they stick to us like leeches, and frankly, I don't think any Indian really likes that.
I don't.
Right. So one is that. The other is, again, you're very right. They don't know, are they Central Asian? Are they Arabs? Are they Persians? Are they Afghans? Or are they just normal Indians who've converted? They don't know that. They'll manufacture all kinds of things about how most of them are descendants of some Arab invader. I don't know why anybody wants to be identified with an invader, but that's what they want to do, right? So they will they will revel in the accomplishments of the Turks. Damn it, the Turks came and raped and pillaged and plundered. The Turks are not exactly, paragons of virtue. Neither were the Central Asians who came. And if you look at what the Central Asians did, Timur and others, when they came and they massacred people, or what the Persians did under Nadir Shah, when they came and massacred people by the thousands, hundreds of thousands, in fact. You take pride in that. So I don't know what to say about these people. They take pride in Mughals. Most of them. I don't want to say certain things because I'll be accused of, saying, forget it, because these are dangerous times. I don't want to go to jail, but there's a lot more I could have said about the Pakistanis. But the fact of the matter remains, they have a very serious crisis of identity, and they don't know how to get around it. And basically, I think their biggest problem is the lack of intellect. There is a serious intellectual crisis in Pakistan. But what do you expect when a 12th pass general prances about as the intellectual genius in Pakistan? Then there's not much that much future that country has. Generals are good for leading armies. Generals are good for fighting wars. Generals are good for military planning. Generals are not intellectual genius. Yeah, there'll be exceptions, one or two, right? Maybe a dozen. And there are some very, very bright generals who retired from the Indian Army, very erudite people. But by and large, that's not your training. That's not what you're supposed to be. You're not an intellectual genius. You are a military analyst. That's what you should remain, at best. And even there, it is one thing to decide, which fighting arm to be placed where, etc., orbats and stuff like that. And quite another to decide on foreign policy issues. That's not a general's remit. And I don't see why generals should get into it. Yeah, security is your domain. Yes, your advice is very valuable. But what do you know about modern economics? What do you know about, high econometrics and financial restructuring of privatization and stuff like that? What do you know about it? Nothing. Zilch, zip. Lekin pretend aise karenge that, they're God's gift to mankind. Now, if that is your intellectual capital, so as to speak, and the only organization which functions in that country, then I can assure you that country is not coming out of trouble anytime soon.
So with that, I'm going to end today's podcast. This was one of the most amazing, entertaining podcasts. Thank you so much for joining me today, sir.
Pleasure.
And to all the viewers, thank you so much for joining me on this geopolitical dialogue. See you in the next one.
StudyIQ IAS. अब तैयारी हुई अफोर्डेबल।